Alright, hello. This is my makeshift role tutorial to show how to create roles in the somewhat new system. It's not really that new, but kind of new, I guess. So, I'm going to be creating a disperser, just like completely recreating it. And this should probably be like a 5-minute tutorial. I have never done this before, so I apologize if the tutorial kind of stinks. Anyways, without further ado, let's just jump into it. So, I'm gonna go like a little bit fast. This kind of assumes that you have some knowledge of what's going on, at least like from a fundamental C# level, I guess. But the basis of our disperser role is a class called disperser, and so every single role has a singular role definition class. That is like the basis of all roles, and every single role needs a role definition class. And there's only one role definition per role. So this disperser, this is going to be my role definition class. And so since role disperser is an imposter, we have a imposter role definition. So that's like the basis of disperser. So what that means is that disperser is going to inherit from imposter role definition. So that means that disperser is an imposter role definition, and yeah. So second, after this, we're going to get started right with the option actions. So the options are probably the easiest part, or like the biggest change since the old system. And if you don't know what the old system is, that's totally fine, probably better if you don't. The new system, however, it makes you declare the options as just straight up variables. So disperser has two options originally. It has a cooldown for its ability, and it has a true or false if the disperser itself gets dispersed. So the first thing is the cooldown. How we do that is we're going to create a field, a cooldown field, or we can call it disperser cooldown. So this is going to represent our cooldown for the ability. And then we add a thing called an attribute. So again, this assumes that you know some C# syntax, but if you don't, this little bracket right here above a field is an attribute. And so the attribute for a cooldown, or sorry, a setting, is the role option attribute. But actually, we can specialize that. So to specialize, basically, this cooldown can be a what's known as a float. So it's a float value, and the way we do that is this float range option. So now we have this attribute, float range option, and we can set some parameters. So the disperser cooldown should have an option range of 0 to 120. So 0 seconds to 120 seconds. Obviously 0 seconds would be a little bit unrealistic, but we still give people the option in case they want to have some fun. So 0 to 120. You can see that my IDE is showing like the 0 to 120 here. Pretty cool, but yours might not do that. But just know that the first two parameters are min and max. So we can actually we can look at the API really quick. This will be posted later in a more official documentation. But if my IDE actually loads, which apparently it's a little bit slow right now, we can see that min, max, step, default, index. So these are all the parameters for this float range option. So let's get back to it. So that means the step. So the default or the original disperser had a step. That means like an increment, option increment of 2.5. So that's what we put here. So now our options go from 0 to 120 with incremental values of 2.5. And finally, it had a default index of 5. And so what the default index is, this is actually just the default value. So if this was 0, for example, the default value would be 0 seconds. With a default index of 5, then that's just 5 times 2.5. So 5 times 2.5, I can do this, 12.5 is the default value. And then finally, as again, kind of a nice to have thing, so when Lotus first released, the suffix was always an S, but it turns out in other languages, it's not always an S. So we can just say suffix type dot seconds, and so this will automatically figure out the best suffix possible that relates to seconds. So you don't have to do any translation or anything like that. It will just always be whatever is the best suffix given the current language. which will probably be yes. But okay, so with all that being done, we now have our first option for disperser, which is its cooldown, and it goes from 0 seconds to 120 seconds with incremental values of 2.5, and the default is index of 5, which we, for our case here, is just going to be 5 times 2.5, which is 12.5. So the default value is 12.5 seconds, which is probably a little bit low, but we can make it 10, and so that makes it 25 seconds. Yeah, okay. So continuing on, the second option is a Boolean. So whether or not the disperser gets dispersed. And so yeah, it's just gonna be a Boolean, true or false. So true, if true, the disperser gets dispersed. If false, otherwise, the disperser does not get dispersed. So the way we do that is kind of like the same way as above. So we can create a Boolean field, and we're gonna call it, the name of the variable doesn't really matter. So just let that be known. But just for like convention's sake, I call it just like the name of the class, so disperser for example, and then like whatever it does. So disperser is dispersed. And that's probably a good name. Okay, so hold on, let me pull, sorry, I lost my place. Okay, and we just finished that. And so kind of like the same as above, where we have this float range option. For Boolean values, so true or falses, we can use the bool option, and there's actually some specifications for this. So we can see default value equals true, so that means that when this option gets generated, the default for this option will be true. So in this case, it would mean that the disperser does get dispersed, and that's going to be like the default, unless the host changes it. And so that's actually good. And then there's another option. So if I were to like look here, we actually have two different types. So we have bool option type on and off, and bool option type enabled and disabled. All this is this is just like how the text is displayed. So in Lotus, there's usually two ways like true or false is written. It's either on and off, or enabled and disabled, where enabled is on, or like, enabled equals true and disabled equals false. This is just allows you to switch between the two if you think that enabled / disabled looks a little bit better than on / off. But again, for disperser, on and off is totally fine because it makes more sense probably. Yeah, so that's it. And so now we have an option that is bound to this value. It's the bool option, and it just is going to dictate whether or not the disperser gets dispersed when they use their ability. And so we now have this, but there is one thing that we're still missing. And that's the fact that these options are not yet localized. What that means is, if I were to start the game and were to look at my options, the names of the options would just be the names of the variables. So it'd say like disperse cooldown, and it would say disperser is dispersed, but it would quite literally be like the name of the variable. So there would be no spacing, it wouldn't be translated or anything like that. So the way we actually add translation to this, also super simple. We add the role localized attribute. Sorry, let me quickly like reference something. Yeah, and then so once we put this on here, this whole option that gets generated will be localized, and then we can set a default translation for that. So the default translation is usually going to be the English one. So in this case, disperser gets dispersed. So that's our English default translation. So when this option gets generated, it's going to generate a localization like key value thingy for the the Lotus localization system, and then it's going to set the default to disperser gets dispersed. So this is what people are actually going to see when they look in the options. And we should also do it for this one. So role localized, and then in this case we're going to say disperser cooldown. Actually, we'll say disperse cooldown. A little bit better. Okay, so we're totally done with the options. Honestly, I said 5 minutes is probably going to be like 15. So I apologize, but you know, I'm bad at estimating times, I guess. All right, and that's all we have to do for the options actually. Now when the role gets initialized, it's very complex, but essentially these two variables will correspond to the current options of whomever is this class represents, I guess. Alright, awesome. And so now the next part of this is going to be identical to the old system in the sense that we define actions by making methods. So for example, we need to make a method that allows the disperser to actually disperse the players. So we'll call it disperse players. And then in Lotus, so the way that we actually make this action like disperse the players, so the disperser is going to disperse players when they pet their pet, assuming that the cooldown is actually like ready. And so we can bind this function to the pet command by adding another attribute. So again with the brackets, and this can be attributes can also be applied to methods. For example, these right here can only be applied to fields, and so if I were to actually like put this right here, for example, we can see that it says this is not valid because this is a method. But the attribute for actually like triggering methods when a thing happens is called roll action, and this roll action can be applied to methods. And so I'm going to declare roll action, and this action is going to be the onPet action. So basically, what happens, the name's a little bit weird right now because I'm still in debug mode, but essentially, when a player pets their pet, or rather when this player, so the player who is currently the disperser, or whomever is the disperser, pets their pet, this whole method will then trigger, based on this like specification here. Awesome, okay. And so that's actually all we need. So now this method is going to run whenever I pet my pet, and we need to handle the cooldown. So that's what the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to say if disperser cooldown dot not ready, then return. So basically, if the disperser cooldown is still on cooldown, this is what this means, then we're going to not do anything. So we just exit the method right away. And I know it looks a little bit confusing because we don't actually set the value of the cooldown here, like we don't create an instance right here, but we can just like do this so that it looks a little bit like there's actually something there. Again, there's a bunch of magic that goes on in the background to actually accept the values here, and so we don't have to worry about if they're actually being a value or not, but my ID will complain, it will say, oh, it's not instanced, and so you can just set it to null, and that's probably a little bit better. Okay. And so we're back to here. So if the cooldown is not ready, then we're going to immediately return. Otherwise, we can start the cooldown because basically we have confirmed that we can execute our ability. And so now we're going to begin the actual cooldown part of it. And so the actual logic, I'm just going to copy and paste from the old disperser because I think it's totally fine. If you want, you can pause the video to kind of read more, but this will just do the actual the dispersion. So that's all this is. And yeah, I apologize for like not really going through this, but again, if you want, you can pause and figure out what's going on here. It's not too crazy. Okay, so that's the whole method there. And so basically, when the disperser clicks pet, we check if the cooldown is available or not. So not ready. If it is ready, so that means it's off cooldown, then we start the cooldown, and then we actually execute the action. And yeah, cool. So that's actually pretty much it. Oh, one last thing. So now we're pretty much set to go. So we have our disperser, we have our options right here. Our options, like the cooldown, will automatically be configured by this right here, and we check, like we set this disperser to disperse, and there's actually some logic to check this right here. But there is one last thing. So previously in Lotus 1.0, there was no way to change the roll icons, but in Lotus 1.1, which is the new version, we can actually set the roll icons, and the way to do that is pretty simple. It actually gets a little bit more complex than what I'm going to show, but for our purposes at this current tutorial, I'm only showing how to code roles in one singular class. So again, this one class right here. And so the way to do different like buttons for a singular class is to add the interface GUI or role GUI. Actually, yeah. roll GUI. And because this is an imposter, because this is the pet button, we can actually just use the normal roll GUI because we're going to manipulate the pet button, which is available to all roles. So I just implement this, and so now this right here, and this allows me to override the pet button right here. So this is all you have to do is you find the button that you want to like manipulate, and so in this case it's the pet button. And again, this is provided by this interface right here. If I didn't have this, then this would do basically nothing. So you need the roll GUI interface, and then from here, it's super simple. So this pet button right here, basically, I'm not gonna get into the details, but there's again some magic going on behind the scenes. But essentially, when the button is going to get manipulated, this function is called, and this roll button editor is passed in. And so all we really need to worry about, like you can basically ignore everything I just said. All you need to do is this editor has two methods on it. So it has this load sprite on button, and it has this load sprite and text on button. You can use either or, but the only difference is that this method right here, so the load sprite and text, actually like changes the sprite, so the picture, and it also changes the text, where the one above only changes the picture. So small distinction. Anyways, for the disperser, we're going to use this one. Excuse me. And our text for this button, it should probably be localized, but for this tutorial we're not going to do that. So we're just going to say disperse. And so that's going to be the text for our button. And the resource path, gets a little bit confusing maybe, but for my add-on, so this Lotus trigger add-on, all my assets are in this folder called assets, roles, and then like here's all the roles. And so I don't have a disperser one yet, but let me create one. So disperser, and then let me grab the sprite that Piggy graciously gave us. So here it is, the disperse sprite right here. So I'm going to copy this in this folder right here. There we go. And then so actually I follow a naming schematic where you can see right here. So I just use the name of the actual role, and then I also name it with what the ability does. So camouflage or camouflage, blackmailer, and so for disperser, the name of this image will be disperser disperse. There we go. Okay, and so and to actually use this image now, we can check out the blackmailer really quick. All it is, and again I apologize, it's not super straightforward, but it's pretty straightforward. Basically, I reference the path of the image. So in this case, I have this constant right here, but really what this looks like is assets.roles.blackmailer, assets.roles.disperser.disperse.png. And so that corresponds to assets, roles, disperser, and then the actual image. So disperser_disperse.png. And then there's one more thing, so 950. Don't really worry about what this is. Essentially, this is like the size of the image, kinda, where a larger number here means a smaller image. And this really corresponds, oh, sorry, I still have that window open, oopsie. Okay, in that case, let me quickly redo this. So, previously we had only the disperse here, and I added my image here, so disperser underscore disperser.png. So I added this to assets.roles.disperser. This path doesn't really matter. The important thing is that you have to specify it in your your actual CS proj file. So I did that right here. This is not part of this tutorial, so I'm gonna glance over that for now. And if you need help on that, there will probably be something else out there sometime in the future, I guess. But anyways, so all you need to know is that this is in some asset folder, and the way that we actually reference it and get it on this pet button right here is I just qualify its path. So in that case, it's going to be assets.roles.disperser, so that's the folders right here, and then finally the actual image file, so .disperser._disperse.png. And then, so as I was kind of saying before, I screwed up. This number right here is required, but essentially it just changes the size. And so in the case of the images provided by Piggy, he did a really great job of making them super large. And so if I were to do like 200, for example, the image would be super large in game. And so we actually need a larger value here to downscale the image, essentially is how it works. And you can look up, it's actually more of a Unity thing than a Lotus thing. Excuse me. So with all that being said, we are basically done. There is one last thing. So I need to mark my class with this roll triggers attribute. Why do we need to do that? Why do we need to do that? It's because I declare a trigger, so that's what this is, an action or trigger, inside of my role definition class. And so the way that Lotus works nowadays is that you can declare actions in any class and hook it up to a role definition, but because this role definition, but role definitions by default do not need to have actions in them. And so to make the whole internal system like aware of our action that we set up in here, we need to have this attribute up here, so this role triggers attribute. This is only needed if you declare an action in your role definition class, so for in Disperse it. And yeah, that's the whole Disperser class, and it's completely set up now. And the last thing I need to do, so for this add-on, is I need to export the class. And so I'll go over how this works and whatnot in a future tutorial, but for our purposes, I just do this, and now our disperser is now bound to our game mode and is ready to be used and seen in game. So hopefully this tutorial worked out, and I'm going to load the game really quick and let's see what it looks like. Hopefully it works. If it doesn't work, that would be not good, and I wasted some time. But even if it doesn't work, I still post this because in general this is how it should go. And yeah, so let me see if I can capture the game. There we go, we can see the game now. Let me make it a little bit larger. Okay, so going into the game, we can see that Disperser is right here, and we have our two options. So Disperser cooldown with a default value of 25 seconds, and it goes from 0 to 120 like we thought. And then we also have this other option, Disperser gets dispersed, on off, great. That's really great. And if I name myself Disperser, hopefully this works. It would be a bit, oh, that's not good. Let's see what happened. Oh, so it couldn't find the resource file. Assets.roles. Hold on, let me see if I can it's good that we can see this actually, because it allows me to show how I debug things. So immediately there was a big red thing, and if there's a big red thing in the console for Lotus, usually then, oh, you cannot see that at all. Let me let me put that up on screen. I apologize. I'll just do the whole window, doesn't matter. Oh, there we go. Okay. So here is the actual error. So basically when I loaded the game, I saw this big red chunk of text, and again with Lotus, if you get a big red chunk of text while the game is loading, usually it means something really bad happened. So here's a really large red text, and then right above it we can see error loading asset, and then it has the actual path of the asset. So that just indicates like right away this is the issue. And then we can actually let's track really quick. So let me hide this, and that right there. And so if I go back to my files right here, assets, roles, disperser. Oh, I see. So the issue I made was that the path right here has to actually specify the name of your add-on too. So in this case, it's Lotus trigger. So if I look at the blackmailer, for example, we can see that, or sorry, if I like look at the constant path I define, it's lotus trigger.assets.roles. So for our case right here, our blackmailer should be lotus trigger.assets.roles, and then the actual like folder and then file. So, oh, you can't see it again. Are you kidding me? Okay, that's really not good. A little bit scuffed. That's okay. I will post in the Discord, I guess, like where you should skip to at what points, because there have been some scuffed moments for sure. But assuming that you've done that, we are going to load up the game again, and this time it's going to work flawlessly, and we can see everything in action. So the game is loading up. Let me see if, yeah, there we go. And I'm just going to show you again in case you didn't see the earlier part of the video. So here's the disperser right here. You can see its options. So disperse cooldown 25 seconds. It goes from 0 to 120 by 2.5 second steps. So exactly what we defined, and the name is exactly what we defined. And then here's the other option. So disperser gets dispersed, on, off. It's really great. So everything is working great. And then if I name myself disperser, so oops, then, oh, I screwed up. There we go. And load the game. So this time, there's no issues at all, and the game's going to be loading. Not everything is like fully implemented yet because I've spent so long on it, but we can see that my pet button right here says disperse, and when I click it, it did my dispersing. And I do plan on adding a low cooldown to the actual button itself, because I think that would be pretty, yeah, that's pretty easy and should be pretty cool. Also, don't mind the actual like naming. There's a lot internally that's not fully implemented yet, but should be implemented soon. So this is going to be on a 25-second cooldown, and then once it's off cooldown again, it should work great. So that concludes my tutorial. I hope that it was okay. If you have any tips about how I can improve my tutorials, that is super appreciated. And yeah, that's all. Bye bye, guys.